The free exercise of religion is an important right in America.
But the free exercise of religion should always take into consideration the needs of our neighbors.
The American Religious Town Hall is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
Welcome, I'm James Weingartner, and I'm here for Jerry Lutz in our COVID edition of the American Religious Town Hall. We're glad that you're joining us, and we're glad that you're here. We have an important subject to discuss with our panelists today. Let's tell you who our panelists are. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Tom?
Thank you. I'm Tom Plumley. I'm a minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I serve as senior minister of First Christian Church, downtown Fort Worth, Texas.
I'm Bishop Michael Olson, and I am the Roman Catholic Bishop of the Diocese of Fort Worth, Texas.
Hi, I'm Carl Trovall. I'm professor of ethics and history at Concordia University in Austin, Texas.
I'm Rabbi Dan Levin. I serve as senior rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
Thank you, gentlemen. People of faith in the United States can be thankful for the freedom that the First Amendment grants to all Americans. It guarantees the free exercise of religion in which government is not to interfere, and yet it does. The recent Supreme Court decision of New York made clear that the government overstepped its limits to churches, synagogues, and mosques in New York. A similar case pending in the Harvest Rock Church in Southern California, yet with so many thousands of people dying from COVID-19 and its effects, the government expects religious people to help protect the larger population by following government mandates. Given the tensions produced by the current conflict between those who wish to guarantee no government interference to the free exercise of their religious life together, and those who believe that religious institutions need to follow government mandates to protect the masses, we ask our panelists to consider the following questions. 1. What wisdom does Isaiah 1:12-17 offer to religious leaders who want to conduct business as usual while the people in their communities are suffering from the consequences of business as usual? 2, does Jesus' admonition to love your neighbor as yourself have implications for religious institutions such as self-restraint? And 3, what did the Apostle Paul mean when he wrote that everyone must submit to governing authorities in light of the First Amendment? These important questions are ripe for you to comment on, Brother Carl.
All right. I want to begin by just saying how important the free exercise clause in our Constitution, freedom to worship, is. It is something sacred that we allow people in the United States of whatever faith or creed to worship and to freely do so and to conduct their religious affairs as they see fit. And that's an important right I think we stand, I know we stand for, and it's important that that's upheld. And so whenever the government makes laws that affect religious institutions, there's always the question of, is this some sort of imposition upon the religion that's somehow undermining their freedom to do as they see fit according to their religious dictates? And the principle is there, and yet at the same time, religious organizations have always been under government regulation as well, and they obey the governing authorities. They make sure that their buildings they build are of the right capacity, that they're safe, that they meet code, that there's all kinds of things that religion willingly submits to for the safety of people. And so I think always the principle is important to maintain, but I think we have to ask under what conditions can you infringe upon that freedom for the sake of the public good, public safety. It can always be manipulated in ways that are real dangerous, the government can. So I think we have to keep our eye out for that. But I do have to say that even in the Christian tradition, you should never use your freedom as a cover for evil. And so any freedom that Christians have, they should make sure that they would do that not as a cover to be selfish about what they're doing, but they have to ask the deeper question about why are we complying or not complying with this government regulation? Is it really something should I use the word or not? Is this really a cross to die on? That you should be throwing yourself out and possibly endangering other people for the sake of freedom to worship? I mean, here's the thing. God does not need our worship. I mean, that is not necessary. But our neighbor needs our love. And so I think our neighbor is a way of expressing that worship.
Thank you. I want to go to the very core, the very center of your moderator's statement, Pastor Weingardner, where it says that the government expects religious people to help protect the larger population by following government mandates. And I would start that clause with the word religion. Religion expects religious people to help protect the larger population. I think it's inherent to what we do. And frankly, we have seen some religious arrogance in this past year. And we need to call it what it is. We have seen some who under the guise of wanting to say, by golly, you can't stop me from doing this, to go out then and do things that are harmful, that have caused the spread of the COVID virus, that have kept us from being able to contain it originally, and then the longer the thing went on, to stop the spread of it and to stop the intensity of it and the numbers of deaths. Now, I don't know when this program is actually going to be aired, but we already have lost more people in the United States to the COVID virus than we did in all of World War II and World War I and the Vietnam War combined. And for religious people to say, oh, but God still requires us. No. Turn again, as is suggested in one of the questions of the moderator's statement, turn in your Bibles to Isaiah 1 and read there where in the midst of a siege of Jerusalem, the prophet says to the wealthy people who are, while people are starving to death in the streets, nevertheless taking foodstuffs, grains and cattle, and taking them to the temple because they have the wealth and power to do it, arrogantly worshiping God. The prophet says, in the name of God, who asked this from your hand? Trampling my court, he said, trample my courts no more. I cannot endure solemn assemblies with iniquity. Says your festivals turn my stomach, basically. It is important that we maintain the right to free exercise of our religion. But religion always requires us, our religion itself, as well as the mutual balance between religion and government in this country, require us also to pay attention to the consequences of what we do for the larger society.
Michael?
Well, thank you. I think I agree on a lot of things. I think there's two extreme positions here which I'd really like to avoid because I don't think they're accurate and they lead to false dilemmas. First of all, in the moderator's statement, it refers to the Constitution granting religious liberty. I think it really is more accurate to say it recognizes it as essential to the person. It's not something that's granted by the government per se, but it's recognized by it. Secondly, that religious freedom is not just exclusive to worship, but also to the practice of one's religion, which includes works of charity, works of justice, prophetic utterances, even tied in with a right to assembly. Now, those principles are at play, as well as from our tradition, the Catholic tradition is human beings are body, soul, integral whole. And so our responsibility is to care not just for the soul, but also for the body, all right? And so love of God and neighbor requires that we have due diligence not to do harm to other people. Now, this issue particularly has to be contextualized somewhat in the development of these decisions that were made by governments, all right? So for example, I'll speak to Texas since I was most familiar with that. Initially, over a year ago, when the COVID pandemic started and the recognitions of it, when people were trying to get a handle on these things, including government, with something that was in many ways uncharted, we were faced with the number of, you could not have gatherings at first more than 50 people, then, no more than 20 people. So that's very early. Now, science and mathematics would say at the same time that the government's saying you have to maintain a social distance of 6 feet, all right, why is the number 20, what's scientific about that number in a cathedral that seats 1,500 people, for example, as opposed to a church that seats 100 people, all right? There's no use of science in that. And so that was applied arbitrarily, just they were pulling a number out, it seemed safe, let's get something out. Well, with reason, discussion, dialogue, prior to any sort of legal action, we were able to say, well, wait a minute, you know, this is essential, and I maintain God doesn't need our worship, but we do need to worship God, all right? And so, as well as the practice of our religion charitably. So the development of protocols, which we've maintained strictly in our diocese, masks, social distancing, frequent sanitizing and hand washing, things that we are stringent about maintaining and have been able to avoid a super spread because of that. And at the same time that the government was recognizing this and putting on these sort of regulations for religious worship, it was permitting bars to open. San Francisco, they permitted the bathhouse to remain open because it was something essential to the gay culture. They permit protests to happen with or without masks or social distancing. So it seems to me that in these times of pressure, we have to articulate what are the priorities and what are the principles. From a religious perspective, I would say that that worship of God is essential, as is love of God and neighbor, protecting the common good in society, and doing our best to do what we have to do in a moral obligation in the best and safest way possible. Dan?
So I think that our conversation and what I've heard in so much of the discourse around these subjects over the last year has to, I think, include sort of a new facet. We spend a lot of time in America talking about rights. What are my rights? And when I talk about rights, I'm talking about me. I think we need to spend a little bit more time, in addition to talking about rights, to talk about duty. not just what do I owe myself, but what do I owe other people with whom I share my city or my society, my community, my country. And I think that we don't spend nearly enough time these days talking about duty, and we spend way too much time talking about rights. In Jewish tradition, there are really two different kinds of teachings that I think bear on this conversation. One is in the Talmud, they take a riff on Leviticus chapter 18, verse 5, where it says, "You shall keep my statutes and ordinances that you shall live by them." And in the Talmud, they say, yeah, live by them, not die by them. So in Jewish tradition, it's important that you follow the law, but you're not supposed to follow the law if it's going to lead to a public calamity or it's going to lead to public endangerment. The second principle that you see in the Talmud, and at this time when the Jewish community was living under the Romans, there was all kinds of discussion about how do we maintain our integrity as Jews while living under a foreign government. And there is a passage in the Talmud that talks about how you relate to a tax collector. And it says, Dina de Malchuta Dina, which is Aramaic, which means the law of the land is the law. So if there comes a point where I, as a religious person, need to do A, B, and C, but the law of the land says do this, you do that. And that's because you have to follow the law of the land, or otherwise the whole society falls apart. And I think what, Michael, you were talking about is really where the problem lies, which is we don't have a lot of respect anymore for those who are entrusted as public servants to have our best interests at heart. We see them as capricious, we see them as arbitrary. And when there seems to be, well, you're saying you can only have 20 people in a cathedral that seats 1,500, but you're going to allow a bar to open, it seems like, and that's how you lose faith in the government institutions, which are designed to protect us.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, I think it's important that the larger community recognizes that you know we have been struggling with this pandemic for a year. It is unprecedented in any of our lifetimes, and in many ways in American history. And there are just not many times in world history where we've had to struggle with the kinds of issues, the multiplicity of issues that we have, and you add to that the mass communication culture that we have, and the way that what everybody does gets spread around. I want the larger community to know that we're trying. I used the word arrogance a while ago, and yeah, there's been a lot of arrogance from religious people during this time, but there's been a whole lot more really working to try to figure out, as the bishop indicated, how we can work together with government to find some balance, to do this the right way, to make sure that we can continue to be who we are, to speak the word that we want to speak, and still to help our neighbors.
Tied in with that, thank you, Tom. I think in following on the rabbi as well, Dan, what you said is we cannot underestimate the importance of a rule of law for the common good, and that has been undermined. And with it, really, a distrust for authority. Anyone who's entrusted with a service of authority, in part through social media, but even through media, I think that anyone who's entrusted with decision-making that requires counsel and judgment will immediately get pilloried. All right, and the only authority that's being held forward in a lot of the social parlance is the authority of me, you know, and I'm the authority. And I think in some ways, certainly the leaders and the companies with regard to social media have sort of advertised that. In other words, you're the authority. You and Siri can decide what you want, your preferences. You'll be fine. Don't worry about relying on that. And then even furthermore, but deliberately through algorithms, just saying like, well, you're not interested in that, so we're not going to bother showing you that. All right, which is a problem, and that's very new. I'd also add, that you've dropped the numbers compared with the wars. I think let's not forget the Spanish flu. I mean, how many millions perish? And in some ways, I think we're doing a lot better in battling this pandemic than we did with the Spanish flu.
Thank you, Michael. Let's go to a break now, and we'll be right back.
We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you and today's closing statements.
We really do want to hear from you, so please don't hesitate to write or to send an email. Let us know what you're thinking and what you'd like to hear about. Time now for our summations. Let's start with Tom.
Thank you. It has been now a year that we've been, even on this program, putting on masks, taking off masks, trying to model good behavior. We've had fewer panelists for a long period of time now because some of our panelists simply cannot travel or choose not to travel to be here, and because we just need to pay attention to the larger needs of our families and the larger communities in which we circulate. This is something that is a challenge for all of us, and the free exercise of religion has been a part of what we've been trying to figure out. It's important for us as religious leaders to recognize the role that we play, but it's important for us always to stay in conversation with each other and with leaders in the larger community to make sure that we're doing that in a way that is responsible.
Good. One of the things I think that all of you have raised is how complicated the issue is, just in terms of the ongoing changing nature of the virus, what we think about, what we learn about it. I mean, I was even thinking, well, we're barely 6 feet apart, and then you're not supposed to be in a room, right, for an extended period of time like we are when we're taping. And so I think this gets to be so complicated on a very practical level that I hope that we have grace. But I do hope that those of us who are religious leaders still listen to those guidelines and try to abide by them as much as possible, and still being able to carry out our obligations. I'm going to close by quoting Luther. He wrote this on the Black Death, and it's under his essay, Whether Christians May Flee from a Deadly Plague. And this is his quote: "I shall ask God to mercifully protect us, then I shall fumigate, help purify the air, administer medicine, and take it. I shall avoid places and persons where my presence is not needed, in order not to become contaminated, and thus perchance inflict and pollute others, and so cause their death as a result of my negligence. See, this is such a God-fearing faith, because it is neither brash nor foolhardy and does not tempt God."
Very good. Yeah.
So I think that, you had spent some time talking about arrogance, and I think that in the Jewish community where we saw, in the midst of the pandemic, these huge weddings or funerals with thousands of people packed in tightly with each other. And we just sort of looked at that. And we forget that a big part of what it is to follow our traditions is to engage in what we call collective sacrifice, that we can't do everything that we want to do just because we want to. It's important that we remember that we have to be there for each other. But one of the things that I've found is that this new time has inspired a whole range of, by following government guidelines, a creativity that we never really knew. I was on a panel last August, and a colleague of mine said, I can't wait for this year's high holidays. I've been doing it the same way for 30 years. This is a chance to rethink how to make this as creative and powerful a religious expression as it can be. I know so many members of my community are more fastidious about their Sabbath observance now than they used to be because they're following the laws and the guidelines, and that has actually amplified their religious expression, just perhaps not in the way that we used to. And maybe new beginnings, it's okay.
Oh, I think it's good for us to remember, first of all, that wherever we have rights, we have responsibilities that are correlative and even derivative of them. Secondly, our Constitution recognizes but doesn't grant these rights. In other words, it recognizes part of human nature. And with those rights come responsibilities. It's important to serve our neighbor, love our neighbor in body and soul. Sometimes that's through a ministry of presence. Sometimes that's through a ministry of absence as well. And I think that we've been able, in the Catholic tradition, to mitigate and change some of the way we do things for the sake of the common good and for especially the most vulnerable among us. Most especially, I think, something innovative that's developed, something we should be doing all along, and that's outreach to shut-ins by telephone, by email, by letters. And I think that in itself is something, is a grace that's come out of this trial.
Thank you, Michael. The charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America, we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. And now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.